Hey, well, welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening for our EA Public Review meeting for the Off-Road Vehicle Management Plan for Fire Island National Seashore. My name is Michelle Carter. I'm a project manager with the National Park Service, and I've been helping facilitate the ORV planning effort. Just a few things before we get started here. Since we're in a virtual environment, participants are going to remain on mute to avoid background noise and other potential technical issues. And this meeting is being recorded, so it'll be available for you to review again, or for folks that weren't able to make it tonight, they'll be able to view it here in a couple of days. We'll post it to the Project Pepsi site after we've had a chance to apply the closed captioning. Okay, next slide, please. So for this evening, during the meeting, if you'd like to have closed captions enabled, you have the ability to do that in your Zoom window. You just click on the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. You'll toggle to the translation button and select caption. You can choose the language of your choice. If you want this option and are having trouble with it, you can try to use the Q&A button to let us know, and the folks on the technical team might be able to help you out. All right, next slide, please. The purpose of our meeting this evening is to share details on the alternatives that are included in the environmental assessment, and to share the updates that the team made in response to input received during public scoping in November. The purpose of our comment period is to take comments on what's presented in the EA, specifically the alternatives and the analysis of the impacts. And we want to hear from you, the public, to see if something's missing or if you think something's incorrect. And after reviewing all of the comments, the planning team will work with the National Park Service Regulations Office to draft a proposed update to the current driving rule. And that process will also have its own comment period. Then after considering all of the comments received during that final comment period, the National Park Service will issue a final rule. Next slide, please. With that, I actually would like to go ahead now and offer the Fire Island team an opportunity to introduce themselves.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alex Romero, and I'm the superintendent here at Fire Island National Seashore.
Good evening, everyone. Jason Pristipa, Chief of Administration at Fire Island.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brendan Newell. I'm the Resource Stewardship Division Manager.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sonia Tayani, Concessions Management and Permit Specialist.
Good evening, Eric Westfall, Chief Law Enforcement Ranger.
Great, thanks, Park team. Next slide, please. We ask tonight that everybody abide by our community agreement standards. We interact respectfully, we assume good intentions, and challenge respectfully. I also wanted to mention your question box is going to be active right now at the bottom of your screen, but we wanted to suggest that you wait to submit your questions until the start of the question and answer session, probably here in about 20-ish minutes. The reason for that is that we're going to prioritize questions tonight that are not answered as part of the presentation. So it's possible that if you listen to what the team has to say, some of the questions you may have may be answered as part of that. Next slide, please. We ask that comments are submitted via the project website, but if that's a problem for you, you can also drop hard copy comments in the mail. On the screen here, you'll see the website address. You'll see a QR code that you can scan with your phone, and it'll take you directly to the project website to provide comments. And the mailing address is also here. And just to note, the comments will be accepted through Sunday, June 30th. Another note about the overall meeting is that we plan to be with you tonight until 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And with that, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Romero to start the presentation.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, good evening, everyone, once again. My name is Alex Romero. I just want to thank you all for joining us this evening. We are at our final stretch, last public meeting as part of this NEPA process. We will go over the details of our schedule and where we are in the process later on in the presentation. You probably heard me say this before. I said it last week. This process has been like a little bit of a roller coaster ride. There were times that I felt during this process that we were going downhill on that roller coaster ride, hands up in the air, with joy and happiness or excitedness. And other times that we just felt like we were holding on to dear life, just trekking up the mountain. But we are at the final stretch. There's been a lot of work put into this process from the park staff, planners, and of course, all of you. Without a doubt, hundreds, if not thousands of hours have been put into this document by the collective we. I believe we've come a long way, heard your concerns loud and clear, and you may be more than satisfied. You may be satisfied with what we have presented or will be presenting tonight or have presented in the EA process. And hopefully we'll be able to hear your comments, as Michelle mentioned, through June 30th. Thank you for your continuous commitment, passion for Fire Island, and all the work you put into this long planning effort. We began this project a little over 4 years ago, and we are excited to share the NEPA, this NEPA environmental assessment document with you, and we hope to get it through the finish line with the signing of the findings of no significant impacts, or what we call the FONSI, by this fall or early winter. With implementation of this new program scheduled to begin 2026, the permit cycle of 2026, and we'll talk about that later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. The enablement legislation, as many of you know, this is the law that established Fire Island National Seashore, September 11th, 1964. And I'll read it real quickly. It's for the purpose of conserving and preserving the use of future generations certain relatively unspoiled and undeveloped beaches, dunes, and other natural features within Suffolk County, New York, which possesses high values to the nation as examples of unspoiled areas of great natural beauty in close proximity to large concentrations of urban populations. So this, as I mentioned, was established in September 11th, 1964. And just a little side plug that we are celebrating our 60th anniversary this calendar year with a number of scheduled programs, including a naturalization ceremony that will be scheduled at the Lighthouse. Just pay attention to our website for future programs and other events that are scheduled leading up to September 11th and a little bit after. The general management plan, getting back to the EA process, was finalized in 2016. It details the collaboration between the 7 layers of jurisdiction here at Fire Island. And we'll go over those details in just a few minutes. The GMP also recognized the importance of the community's roles as stewards in the protection of Fire Island's role-less character. We have also had some in-depth conversation on role-less character. Role-less and vehicle use are, of course, completely different. We know that vehicles were used on Fire Island long before it was established as a national seashore, and we will continue to protect the resource by now allowing for hardened surfaces or major increases in vehicle use throughout the island. Next slide, please. Thank you. The Blue Book defines the regulations over sand driving on National Park Service land on Fire Island National Seashore. Key requirements in the regulations may have remained the same, but the key requirements of how driving occurs or is managed has not. The regulations allow for particular use, and in our case, our ORV driving regulations allow for driving across federal lands, and we manage it through a permitting system. So many of you do know that the first Blue Book of First Regulations were established in 1977, amended in 1987, and now we are going through this new regulation change that will change or mature with how the island has been maturing over the years. Next slide, please. So many of you know this. I've said this. I've shown this slide many times. There's 7 layers of jurisdictions at the park, shared boundaries. There's at least 7 competing interests and missions that often do not align further, requiring everyone within the boundaries of the National Seashore to work together to manage our shared resource. It is not common in national parks to have this number of jurisdictions and varying issues. But the beauty of our complex tapestry is that there is something for everyone on Fire Island, and there is a common thread with all these layers of jurisdiction, and that is protecting our resources. And just to go over real quickly and briefly, these 7 layers are federal government, the National Park Service working with Fish and Wildlife and Army Corps. There's state along with tribal. You have county, 2 towns, 2 villages, unincorporated hamlets, and of course the nonprofit, the Nature Conservancy. Next slide, please. Just a quick recap. We've covered this multiple times throughout the NEPA process. The EA is grounded by the purpose and need. And just to go over the 3 bullets on the purpose, it's to protect the seashore resources and a safe visitor experience, allow appropriate and equitable vehicle access to supplement water-based transportation, improve the administration of the ORV permitting program. Under the need, we address changes in development, access, and technology on Fire Island and the dynamic nature of the barrier island. And the last bullet, provide the National Park Service future flexibility as conditions continue to change. Next slide, please. And now our team will go over key components of the environmental assessment and the alternatives proposed to update the regulation, including the National Park Service proposed alternative. We'll go over those key components of the environmental assessment in just a second. The one thing I will say, as many of you know, I've been here for 6 years, coming this October, been in many meetings, and as I said earlier in this presentation, out of the 6 years that I've been here, 4.5 years have been planning for this environmental assessment and this regulation change. And I've heard many comments, whether they were verbally, through email, at meetings, and I just wanted to highlight some of the things, some of the comments that were made that helped frame this conversation, to help frame the process that we are going through. Some of the things that I've heard: we need to enroll more students to the Fire Island School. We need to attract younger families to our communities. Ferry service is not adequate to meet the needs of the communities. Why is the waiting list so long and have to wait so many years to get a permit? We need to recruit more people into the volunteer fire department. We've noticed medical exceptions on the rise. The need to pick up and drop off students on the mainland, and work times are not compatible to the ferry service. People need to get off the island earlier or get back earlier. Next slide, please. During NEPA scoping, we collected and reviewed public comments. A few updates to the action alternatives were made based on the public feedback, primarily to the definition of brief and occasional absences to align with the town of Islip definition. Brief and occasional, as pointed out in the first bullet, was changed from the public scoping meeting of 14 days that was proposed to now 30 days. The seasonal driving window in the spring and the fall shoulder seasons have also changed. So during the months of June, September, and October, weekday driving will occur 24 hours a week, 24 hours a day, with weekends from 6 p.m. to 9 a.m. We've also made changes to the trips for construction and business permit holders based on some of the comments that were made. For public scoping, we changed it from 1 trip to 2 trips per day. For each of these changes, the team considered impacts to the park resources and administration of the program. The increase in allowed trips for construction and business drivers was made based on feedback from stakeholders during the NEPA scoping, where concerns were expressed about disadvantages to contractors who live on the island if they were limited to 1 trip per day. We considered the request to manage trips for on-island versus off-island contractors differently, but that would only add to complexity to the program and not meet the National Park Service purpose and need, which includes improving the administration of the program. Emergency services are highlighted in the current new regulation change, but remain unchanged for our current conditions. Final point that I wanted to bring up that's not on the slide deck regarding considerations of how we updated the caps and how they were developed. As of January 2024, we had approximately 222 year-round residents living in households year-round. We issued the capped number of driving permits. That's 145 driving permits. There were 32 residents on a year-round waiting list, plus the number of ICE over permits that were issued gave us the number that we are proposing in our preferred alternative. To acquire a permit, you must show, of course, proof of residency 12 months prior and vetted properly through the towns and the villages. Construction permit caps were established by the number of people on the waiting list and ICE over permits in 2023. Part-time permits have been a lively or active part of this discussion and planning effort, and part-time permits are expected to sunset as originally planned, that is designed to grandfather residents that lived on the island prior to 1976. ICE over permits will also sunset, since the new regulation will meet the current needs of drivers on the wait list. Next slide, please. And I will turn it over to Brendan now. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and hello again, everybody. So this is a summary of the 3 alternatives analyzed in detail in the EA. Alternatives B and C are both action alternatives that would change the current regulation. Both of these alternatives have been slightly modified since NEPA scoping. Alternative B is the MPS preferred alternative. There are more details on these action alternatives later in the presentation. Alternative A is the no action alternative. This alternative serves as a baseline to compare the impacts of the action alternatives to. The no action alternative includes modifications to the 1987 regulation outside of what is described in the Blue Book, such as changes to the seasonal driving windows, allowing driving by waitlist applicants when the bay is frozen, and allowing all-wheel drive vehicles. Because current ORV management practices have essentially modified the 1987 regulations, no action would still require a change to the existing regulations to bring the program into compliance. We considered having an action alternative that kept things exactly the same as they are now, but included as an action to change the regulation. We determined that the existing conditions did not meet the purpose and need of the proposal, and that the changes to how the ORV program is administered and regulations are needed. Instead, we developed Alternative B with the intention of a measured increase in permit caps that accounts for the 222 current year-round residential households and how many permits are actually issued now annually when considering ICE over permits, temporary permits, and part-time resident permits, which will phase out. Next slide, please. This slide shows a high-level summary of the data and other information that the team has been using throughout the planning process. All of this information is used in the environmental assessment to inform impacts associated with each alternative. A few specific examples of science and reports used to inform this process are the 2011 Fire Island National Seashore Alternative Transportation Study completed by the Volpe Center, studies on driving impacts and dune vegetation, the 2003 Negotiated Rulemaking Advisory Committee for Off-Road Vehicle Driving Regulations at the Fire Island National Seashore, and the Seashore's programmatic agreement with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on threatened and endangered species management. Next slide. Throughout this process, we've evaluated impacts of the alternatives to MPS resources, visitors, and stakeholders. Resources in the project area that may be affected either beneficially or adversely by alternatives are analyzed in detail in the EA. These impact topics are dune systems and plant communities, wildlife, sunken forest and the Sunken Forest Preserve, visitor use, experience, and safety, NPS managed sections of Burma Road and dune cuts, and socioeconomic resources. Many additional important topics to MPS and stakeholders were considered but not carried forward for detailed analysis because the environmental impacts to resources or values would not be potentially significant, the impacts were not central to the proposal, and/or a detailed analysis of these impacts was not necessary to make a reasoned choice between alternatives. More information on these considered but dismissed impact topics can be found in Appendix C of the EA. Next slide. Now we're going to review the key elements of the 3 alternatives to update the Seashore's ORV management program and the current regulation. These key updates to the regulation and management program that are proposed include permit caps, round trips through the gate per day, qualifications and definitions for alternatives B and C, seasonal driving, and overarching considerations. Next slide. This table summarizes the maximum permit caps under each driving category, as well as some of the other proposed changes. Columns A, B, and C show the permit caps for each alternative. Under alternative B, the MPS preferred alternative, the permit caps would be updated in the new regulation under the MPS proposed action for each category. This includes an increase of up to 200 year-round resident permits, an increase of up to 145 construction/business permits, the separation of public utilities and essential service permits into 2 categories with no permit limit on each, and the removal of a trip cap for recreational driving on the east end for hunting and fishing access. Under Alternative C, the changes are similar to the proposed action, except there is no set limit on permit caps for year-round residents and construction business permits. Under all alternatives, applicants must meet the conditions to qualify for each permit. The superintendent may issue permits for hardship, and the part-time resident permits remain as they are now. This is the status quo for part-time resident permits because the category was created to grandfather in an existing use when the original driving regulations were created, and the Seashore has always planned to phase out this category once there were no qualified applicants. Any change that allows additional part-time resident permits is counter to the purpose and need of the ORV management update, as all driving permits exist to supplement essential access when water-based transportation is not available. And this access is available during the months when seasonal residents occupy Fire Island. Technically, although we're maintaining the status quo, there is one proposed change to this category in the action alternatives, and that is reducing the cap on part-time residents from 100 to 50. But this change is only made to reflect the current number of eligible part-time resident permits, which is less than 50. Next slide. This table summarizes the trips that would be allowed per day per category under each category. The change that impacts all permit categories is redefining trip as through an MPS gate, not on and off of Fire Island, which is how it is defined in the current regulation. Note that the only changes proposed under the action alternatives to the number of trips is an increase from 1 to 2 for essential services and construction business, and a decrease from 2 to 1 for recreational drivers. Next slide, and I will pass it to Jason.
Thank you, Brendan. This slide includes clarifications on the definition of residency. The definition of a year-round resident hasn't changed substantively from the current rule, other than to clarify for 7 days per week, which has remained consistent since scoping. Brief and occasional absences are defined as being absent from one's Fire Island residence for no more than a total number of 60 days during the permitted driving period each year, for no more than 30 consecutive days. We received constructive comments related to the definitions of brief and occasional absences as well from our pre-NEPA scoping, and have now aligned our definition with the town of Islip. This will provide some administrative consistency. Next slide. Qualifications for construction business permits. Eligibility for a permit would require proof of work for an extended period of the year-round work, consisting of at least 6 months of work total within the construction business driving season, with up to 3 months from the previous year's driving season allowed to be used to meet this definition. These qualifications have not changed since scoping. Next slide. The definition of essential services. Essential services are any motor vehicle whose use on Fire Island is essential to continued use of residences. This may include vehicles actively used for transporting heating fuel and bottled gas, sanitation or refuse removal, not including construction refuse. Note that construction debris would shift to the construction business category, and septic pump out services. Permits from this category would be issued based on a demonstrated community need. Next slide, and over to Sonia.
Thanks, Jay. So this chart lists some of the differences between the alternatives. The main difference is the proposed action has caps and the alternative action has no caps. Proposed action B, these actions will allow year-round residents access, which should work better for residents and the park as there would be fewer exceptions. Contractors who have year-round work would have simpler access, but are expected to go by water when it is available. This is a more streamlined approach, showing a driving season and a no driving season for all categories except utilities and essential services. For alternative C, these modifications were added to be responsive to public comments while being consistent with the purpose and need. Alternative C has a version of a shoulder season similar to the no action alternative. Recreational driving is authorized from September 15th to January 31st for sportsmen fishing and hunting. This is a change from no action to allow for a longer season, but doesn't conflict with plover season. Alternative C, residents and essential services will have no driving on weekends beginning the Friday before Mother's Day through the last day of school. Contractors, weekday driving has one additional week compared to the proposed action B and ends the Friday before Mother's Day. Public utilities and recreational driving is the same as the proposed action. Next slide, please. Listed here are the overarching considerations for the alternatives. So we redefined, I believe Brendan said this, we redefined a trip as a trip through either the west or east gate, which is critical to enforcing our regulations. The current definition is a trip off the island and is difficult to enforce. We considered the vehicle type. The 36 CFR 7.20 only allows four-wheel drive vehicles. The alternatives will now include all-wheel drive vehicles. The next consideration was to update the regulations to allow certain existing practices, such as access to eastern communities through the west gate because of the breach at Old Inlet. Next slide, please. So the superintendent maintains the ability to close the beach to driving for resource and safety concerns under all the alternatives. Along with the updated regulation, the towns and villages have the ability to regulate driving further by limiting the number of permits they issue to their communities. And the last consideration was long-term climate change and sea level rise projections and the related viability for driving access on Fire Island. Next slide, please. And we just have to wait. I'm not sure. Michelle is having some technical difficulty. Oh, Alex, you're on.
Yes, I am. Brendan, do you want to take these next two slides over?
Sure. So you can go to the next slide, I think. So this slide shows where we are currently in the process. Many of you probably attended the NEPA scoping meetings in the fall. We are currently in the NEPA document public review, as well as this meeting you're attending tonight and the meeting we had last Wednesday. This is the time period when we have a over 30-day public comment period where you can submit your comments in the Pepsi system or by mail, as Michelle indicated. And then in summer 2024, we will draft the proposed rule and we will use the public comments that are submitted as well as past public comments as part of this process. And we will continue coordinating with the communities and municipal partners during this time on implementation. In fall 2024, we plan to issue a decision document and final rule. This is the finding of no significant impact that Alex discussed earlier. And then we do not plan to implement until January 2026. And this will give us time to develop an implementation strategy and continue working with the communities and municipal partners, as well as it accounts for the fact that these are annual permits, and fall 2024, we would be pretty close to when we would be typically issuing the permit. So we expect status quo for 2025. Next slide. This shows how you can submit comments. The Pepsi site is available through the link on the page. This is also, you've likely been emailed links to this in the form of a digital newsletter, and you can find this information on our website. And if that doesn't work for you, although this is the preferred way, you can submit written comments by mail to the address on the screen. And these slides are posted on the website, and so you can get this address. It's also just our address, which is available on our website, and submit those comments with the subject offer vehicle management plan, attention Superintendent Alexi Romero. There's also the QR code on the screen, and you can use that right now with your phone to pull up the Pepsi page and find out how to comment. Comments must be received by June 30th, 2024. And we'd like to note that commenting is not a form of voting, and that comments should be relevant to the issues, impacts, and alternatives associated with the program environmental assessment. So we're not looking for comments on e-bikes or individuals' permit status. Those would be outside of scope of this regulation and would be matters handled in another venue. Next slide. So for the question and answer process today, there's a Q&A box, and we highlighted this earlier. So you may or may not see a chat box, but you should see a Q&A box. So that's where you should be putting your questions. After we wrap up, after Alex says a few words, we're going to transition to about a 5-minute break, and we will be collecting those questions, and they can continue to roll in. And then we will be back in a few and answering that as a panel of our team. Over to Alex for any additional comments.
Yes, thank you, Brendan. Since we have approximately 60 participants, we would like to have you limit your questions to your top 2 priorities so that we can grab them and sift through them and answer them accordingly. We just want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to ask their most important questions. So please limit them to 2 questions, and if possible, to 250, 300 characters. We will take our pause right now for 5 minutes. It is 7:04 by my watch, and we'll resume this process at 7:09. And just for a point of clarification, I believe we are on till 8 o'clock and not 8:30 as mentioned earlier. So thank you for that. All right, so we'll take, let's say it's 7:05, we'll be back at 7:10 for the Q&A portion of this process. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, I had some technical difficulties, so I apologize for that, and I appreciate the park team coming on to step up to take some of the slides that I was supposed to go through. So just a quick check. Brendan, can you hear me okay? I just want to make sure things are working properly now.
Yep, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, guys. I'm sorry about that. I've done lots and lots of Zoom meetings, and this is a first for me, so I'm not sure what happened. But all right, so we're going to hop right now into the question and answer session. I'm sure Brendan told you that we're using the Q&A box to facilitate this session. I just wanted to note that again in case folks may have joined later in the presentation. And I also wanted to note that we are going to focus the questions on the topic of the environmental assessment. If there's questions that are outside of scope, we're not planning to answer those tonight. So we just ask that you keep your questions focused on what is presented in the EA and questions related to that. So with that, it looks like we do have some things coming in here, and I'll go ahead and turn this first question over to Brendan. Like I said earlier, we're going to read the questions aloud so everybody has a chance to hear it. And this question is saying it's unlikely. Is it unlikely that we'll see additional changes between the current alternative B plan and the draft proposed rule based on these public comments?
Yes, it's relatively unlikely that we will see significant changes. Typically with these processes, if At this point, what we're looking for is information that is incorrect, or if there was a serious flaw in the analysis. So if we receive that type of information, then we would likely issue what's called an errata sheet with those details. But as of right now, I think it's safe to assume that this will be the MPS proposed alternative will be where this process ends.
Okay, thanks, Brendan. Moving along here, and just wanted to also note, just for folks on the line too, I think we said this earlier in the presentation, but we will be taking questions until 8:30 Eastern time. So like throughout this Q&A session, please continue to submit your questions, and we're going to do our best to get to all of them. But moving,
Hey, sorry, Michelle, it's actually 8 o'clock.
oh, 8 o'clock, I'm sorry. Thanks for the correction. Okay, so moving down here, Alex, we'll send this next question over to you. The person's noting, Alex, there were comments you received that supported increasing driving and expanding permits. They're saying, to be fair, we want to hear comments that you received that opposed increasing the permits and that were against expanded driving.
Sure thing, Michelle. Thank you for that. So yes, again, 6 years working here, Fire Island, not enough years as many of you living on Fire Island. But one of the things that I have noticed is that that there has been some support for an increase within families or within extended families to increase the driving permit cap. But also at the same time, there's probably just as many people who are opposed to it. The one thing I will say, this whole process that how we arrived to the current cap limit from our preliminary proposed action to have no caps to a cap, we used an algorithm that was similar to what established the caps of 1987 for both construction essential and also for, construction and residential. The one thing that I will say is that we arrived at those cap limits, and if there are community impacts, I've said this before time and time again, that we have to start working with the towns, and the towns do have the right to limit the caps. I have a meeting scheduled. We are actually working towards scheduling it with both town supervisors of Islip and Brookhaven to see if we can come to an agreed to cap limit with community leaders that we will be meeting with both Angie Carpenter and Dan Panico to see if we can come to that number that would establish a town cap. And then the federal permit would follow after the town permit is issued. Hopefully that gets to the answer. Michelle, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Okay, this next question will go over to Brendan. They're asking if we can explain how the increase in driving by potentially up to 23% is aligned with the NPS mission of maintaining a roadless island.
Sure, thanks, Michelle. So as Alex highlighted, there is a difference between roadless and vehicles on the beach. So we've been, as I highlighted in the slides, we had a lot of science and various reports informing this process, and research shows that driving on the beach berm in areas where the situation is very dynamic has limited impacts on the resource, and that driving in areas like dunes or of course any of our sensitive areas like wilderness would degrade those resources. So our driving program limits it to areas where there's minimal impacts, and the impacts that we typically see are people driving in areas that they're not supposed to be, which is an enforcement issue, and which is part of our ORV management program. Back to you, Michelle.
Great, thanks. As we also go through the Q&A session, we'll go ahead and ping team members that seem like the most appropriate person to ask the question of. And if others from the park team feel like they want to chime in, feel free to do so. Okay, so Brendan, sorry to keep picking on you, but we're gonna go ahead and put this next one over to you also. It's noting with sea level rise, driving will more and more be diverted off of the beach and onto the pedestrian sidewalks. How is expanding the amount of driving considered logical, given that this additional inland driving will impact community infrastructure, pedestrian safety, and quality of life?
Sure, thank you. So the MPS permit program is limited to our jurisdictional areas. Of course, this is a linear system on Fire Island, but the towns and villages regulate what happens within the communities and are free to further restrict driving. Our proposed cap should be thought of as a ceiling on the amount of permits that could be issued, as Alex mentioned. We're also coordinating with the towns and villages on them potentially establishing additional caps. We recognize that would be complicated. But again, just because the sea level is rising and it may seem like those things would be redirected to the communities, those are not areas that are within our jurisdiction. That is not what our permits are issued for access to. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case. And this isn't in the question, but we also have some interior routes on our lands, and just because the beaches may become impassable for various reasons in the future, and this is happening now where we close stretches of the beaches for piping plovers, or because there are pinch points, that doesn't necessarily mean that we redirect traffic into the interior routes. It just means that people need to find a different way to get there. So we'll see what the future brings on this, but the areas outside of our control are just that. But we're happy to coordinate with and committed to coordinate with other jurisdictions on cross-jurisdictional issues.
Okay, thanks, Brendan. All right, we'll grab somebody else from the park team now. We'll go over to Jason. Jason, this question is how is construction debris going off the island during the season? How is it that having the construction debris go off the island during the season, how is that not going to be a huge environmental impact as debris builds up, basically?
So construction debris should primarily be leaving via freight during peak season. There are mitigating options such as limiting the construction activity during peak seasons, as well as those permit holders with essential service carding permissions supplementing during peak need or individual need.
Okay, sorry about that. My buttons are a little sticky over here. Jason, I'm gonna go ahead and throw this next question over to you too. If the goal is less driving on the island, why are residents limited to 30 consecutive days or 60 cumulative days per year off island? If we're gone and it is our primary residence, it shouldn't matter how often we're gone.
Yeah, so we've drawn a line for demonstrated need for access at the point of year-round residency. And so we need to take that line somewhere. How often or how long can you be absent from your residence while still being considered a year-round resident with that demonstrated need? And the definition that we've posed here aligns with the existing local town definition for administrative consistency as well.
Okay, thank you. Great. Next question is going over here to Brendan. How are more cars added to the permit cap not going to affect the environment?
So I know it seems straightforward to say more permits equals more cars, but as we highlighted in the presentation, what's happening right now is that there are periods of time where where driving is granted for folks on the wait list, for people with hardship, year-round residents, and for other needs for access for various essential services or times when emergencies happen, and we're issuing permits for access. So it's not as straightforward as the permit caps raising equals more cars. Of course, that may be the case, but I think will be a lesser degree than what it seems with the raise of caps. And our focus is on, as I said earlier, limiting to where people are driving and when, so that there's not a conflict with our visitors and resources during peak seasons. And if we see resource damages based on current driving or any future changes in driving, we can shut down those areas, whether those be resource damages to natural or cultural resources, or visitor safety issues that emerge. Whether or not we see new species coming to the park and new restrictions are needed to be put into place. All of those things are still within our control, and we intend to maintain those things to make sure that any changes to the program do not result in resource damages.
Let me just piggyback on your comment, Brendan, also. And yes, the flexibilities are being built into the new rule change to allow the superintendent to further restrict, as you just mentioned, because of safety or resource damages. But the other thing I also wanted to mention is something that we highlighted earlier, that the part-time permits are also set to sunset eventually. So we will not be issuing any more part-time permits. So as those permits do go down, and we have approximately 40-something more part-time permits that are issued, as those sunset, that we and as you mentioned, as far as the emergency exceptions that we've allowed, over ice over driving that we've allowed as well, and other driving conditions that we allowed, we don't see how the increased cap will have that much more of an impact as it's reflected on paper.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. This next question here, we'll go over to Sonia. So Sonia, this is about the municipal category, and a request previously to include up to 5 permits to be issued. They're noting that we didn't talk about this during the meeting tonight, and they're wondering if the park is including a cap or the number of municipal permits in any of the alternatives, and they're asking if this would also lift the restriction of an employee living on or off the island.
So we did discuss the problems some of the communities have with this and have changed who would qualify for a municipal permit. So right now we issue 5 permits, and that to all to on-island residents, and that limit, the number 5, is not going to change, but 3 can be issued to on-island residents and 2 can be issued to employees off the island. If you want, you can use all 5 for on-island residents, but now we have the flexibility of allowing 2 of the permits to be used for off-island employees.
Okay, thank you. Jason, this next question's for you. What is the rationale for changing construction and other bulk debris from sanitation necessary services to the contractor category?
The preferred alternative actually retains the definition in the current regulations and clarifies and realigns our practices with that definition. Municipal solid waste is consistently treated as a health and safety essential service, while construction debris is a voluntary waste, which can be reasonably mitigated at the individual and community level.
Okay. Thank you. Brendan, we're gonna put this next one over here to you. They're asking about why there hasn't been a mention of an accessible or accessoride like shuttle for people with disabilities.
Sure. Well, that's not really within scope for this regulation. That would be a service or something that perhaps the MPS would run themselves that would be outside of the purview of this regulation. So as of currently, we don't have anything like that. But if there are accessibility concerns, then you should reach out to the park and contact the superintendent's office.
I was just going to say that, Brendan, we've had conversations in the past regarding that type of service, and whether or not we would be open to explore it. I've had conversations with the ferry companies regarding this, or actually one of the ferry companies regarding this option. But yes, if it does need to be further explored, we are open to the discussion or the proposal.
Okay, thanks. Got lots and lots of questions coming in, so thank you all for being active and submitting stuff. Okay, this next two questions we'll pass over to Sonia. The first one is, how are you going to determine if someone is truly a year-round resident before they receive a permit?
So it's going to be similar to what we're doing now. Plus, we will be continuing working with the towns, and we're going to require supporting documentation. We're still trying to work out what documentation is going to be needed as far as proof of residency. So that hasn't been determined yet, but they will get vetted. Everyone will get vetted, and we're just still working through the process. And actually, the next question, will there be a vetting process for the extra year-round resident permits, 55, which will be issued if Plan B is implemented? And that answer is a definite yes. Every year-round resident applicant will be vetted. Thank you.
And can I just add to that?
Mhm.
One of the primary fixes here for definitions is to the definition of a trip. And I know Sonia receives a lot of concerns about people who may or may not actually be part-time or year-round residents. And because of the way the trip definition was written, it was difficult to enforce. And so we're hopeful that this will help us be able to administer the program and hold permits for those who are actually using them as year-round residents.
Okay, great. Next question goes over to Eric. During the presentation, there's two questions. Well, it's related to construction workers are expected to go by water when the ferries are available, and they're asking, why is that assumed and how is it enforced?
All right, so good question. I think some of it comes down to context. Permitted, non-permitted vehicles would be expected to travel by ferry. When a vehicle has a permit and they're within their driving allowances, they're able to go through those federal tracts of land. And as far as how it's enforced, no different than it is now. Nothing will change if that's the question. So when rangers see a violation, or if they find that vehicles have crossed federal lands illegally, they've got a number of options that are available to them. If they can catch the person, everything from a verbal warning, a citation, a mandatory appearance in court citation, all the way up through arrest. And there's two other comments that have come in, and they're very similar, and they kind of pigtail off of this. So one of them, Michelle, if you don't mind, I'll take the one about essential services and DoorDash, about people slipping through the gate. So a service like that is not considered an essential service, nor are we proposing that it would be. And when we see things like this, we know that the gate is not as secure as everyone would like it to be. We are actively working on systems and contracts and trying to make that gate more robust. It's going to take some time. So unfortunately, right now, people can slip through it. Their GPS takes them or says that they can go to any particular community. And if somebody isn't there to stop them, they can find a way to get through the gate. And usually it's through literally tailgating. And when we see those, we very often, almost without fail, I can't say never, but they almost always get a citation for that. Multiple attempts have been made to the three GPS controlling companies that you can request that that the data won't allow them to show a driving route. I've tried making that request to those companies a number of times, and nothing has happened with that. So that would help with things like DoorDash or other people such as Lyft or Uber that are trying to get through because their GPS tells them that they can get there. Let me see if I look at the comment here to make sure that I got all of that. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think you did. Thank you. Okay. Looking through some of the questions that are coming in here. This next one will go over to Brendan. And they're asking what's the basis for making these changes. There's a comment that the Blue Book has been satisfactory for many years now, and why now?
Sure, thank you for the question. So, some may feel that it's been satisfactory for many years, but we've also received many concerns and comments, and there's been efforts for decades to try to update the regulation and the program. And in addition, we, while considering updates, we were told by our solicitors that our current program is out of step with the existing Blue Book. So what people are currently doing and what the park has been issuing is not quite what's in the regulation, as we highlighted earlier. So we have to update the program. And then, as we also highlighted and summarized in our purpose and need, there's a lot of various things we're balancing here. And one of the things is the administration of the program, which is something that is a big challenge for the park, and so we have limited resources to do so. So those are all various reasons for the updating of the regulation currently.
Okay, thank you. And Eric, we're going to go back over to you now for this next question. The current weekend driving restrictions during the shoulder seasons seem to have been successful in reducing dangers to children and residents. They're concerned about allowing more driving access in these periods, especially in the context of more permits. They're worried that it'll create a dangerous and less desirable environment.
Sorry, didn't put my mic boom down. I understand that concern, and I'll kind of re-echo what Brendan had already said a little bit. I think Alex said it too. The towns are more than welcome to restrict driving as they fit within the parameters that they're afforded by either county ordinance or state law. If the towns or the communities don't issue a permit, we are that last step. We will not issue a permit as well. So what we are trying to do is give those communities as much of the control as they can, because my rangers cannot go into your communities and enforce traffic laws. That there is another question on there that's very similar to that, so hopefully I'm answering that. New York and Fire Island share concurrent jurisdiction, but unlike other park units where concurrent jurisdiction is almost equal, both parts federal and state, New York did not give us what other states have given in concurrent jurisdiction, our ability to enforce certain things. So what that means is I can't go into, and by I mean the law enforcement rangers, we can't go into the community and enforce a state law on a state citation or a state charge. The state never gave us the ability to do that. Federally, we have a law, it's called the Assimilative Crimes Act, where we can take a state law and make it ours. But we can only do that when we're within our federal jurisdiction. So let's go back up to, yeah. So when it comes to, say, somebody breaking a speed limit in Saltaire or whatnot, I have zero ability to address that at all. And that would be on the communities themselves.
All right, thanks, Eric. Okay. Going down to a question for Alex now. It's a little bit outside of scope, but the question is asking, how are you going to entice younger people to come to the island when prices on the island are so high and it's so difficult with obtaining a driving permit? So
It is very much out of scope. I just see, what our role is as a federal government and the interstitial lands that we manage within the seashore boundaries, and what's the community's responsibilities of how to entice younger families, younger people to work and live on the island. So I see them as two different things. Although it was mentioned that one, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that not having a driving permit or an accessible driving permit is another roadblock to not allow younger families to come live and work on the island. So it's just one of those questions that were brought up, and increasing the cap by 55 permits, or capping them to another new cap limit with towns issuing those caps could perhaps attract newer, younger families to Fire Island. But again, it's out of scope for how we, the National Park Service, could do that.
okay, thanks, Alex. All right, lots of questions coming in. So Eric, we'll go with you for this next one. They're asking, will the proposed changes of the NPS preferred alternative B change the NPS's responsibility for enforcing traffic safety laws such as speed limits?
So as I just mentioned, no, nothing changes whatsoever with how the rangers will be enforcing those federal laws. But again, we're only able to enforce them on the federal tracts of land. So as an example, Burma Road through the checkpoint and up to Kismet, the beaches and whatnot, and the interstitial tracts between the communities. But we are not able to enforce any traffic laws that would be within the communities themselves. And that does apply to other laws as well. If we come across like a disorderly conduct, we have the ability to stop that by both state and federal law. If it's in the community, I can't take action. I can't cite or arrest for it. I can hold and detain for Suffolk County, but I can't use a New York instrument such as a citation or the arrestability to arrest on those state charges within that jurisdiction.
Right, I apologize. My buttons are a little sticky here tonight. Okay, Brendan, this next question is going over to you. It's about it's saying off-season permits. I'm wondering if this question actually might be about the part-time resident permits. You want to talk about why those are phasing out?
Sure, yeah. The question is, why are you phasing out the off-season permits? And we covered this, but these were always planned to phase out. It was a grandfathering in an existing activity when the original regulations were put in place. And that's been the plan since those regulations were put in place and updated. So we're just continuing the status quo there, respecting that historical activity for the folks that had it when the seashore was established and when the regulations were put in place, but continuing to phase it out.
Okay. Sonia, this next one's coming over to you. They're asking, have you considered working with community leaders to vet applications for a true year-round resident?
Yes, we have considered this, and we hope to work with community leaders along with the towns in order to determine residency. That also goes along with the supporting documentation that we will require from all the residents.
Can I just jump in here and just make another comment to that? The one thing that we also do work with is most of the folks that are on this call, many of the communities who raise a concern or an issue regarding residency and complaints. So we do work with local community members, local government, and yes, community leaders to vet this as permits as well, and also to investigate too. Those who claim residency and who may not be a full-time resident.
Okay, thanks. Eric, I'm going to pass this next question over to you, and then I don't know if anybody else would need to jump in or not, but this question is asking, could a village such as Ocean Beach or Saltaire ban all vehicular traffic in its boundaries?
I'll be honest with you, I'm not really sure how to answer that because I kind of alluded to it before. If the communities have the ability by the state law to do so, then I guess the answer would be yes. From a federal standpoint, I just don't know how I could answer that. You could certainly reduce the number of permits that you allow, but it would be similar. My guess is it would be similar to a town adjacent to another town that doesn't want any traffic to go through, and they ban traffic. I'm pretty positive that that would not be allowed, but I'm not really sure within those communities what is designated as a public thoroughfare.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Brendan. This question is asking what kind of monitoring is being proposed in order to ensure driving is not impacting park natural and cultural resources.
Sure, thank you for the question. We mentioned we have the year-long period to refine implementation strategies, and that would include developing a monitoring program. As of right now, we monitor for violations. We monitor using gate records for who comes through, and we have law enforcement patrols for any that detect driving in the rhizome rule area, 20 feet from the dune, as well as driving in areas that are not authorized. And in addition, of course, the impacts may extend into areas that are outside of our jurisdiction if people are driving in areas they shouldn't. And we would be very open to coordinating on cross-jurisdictional monitoring if the communities or municipalities are interested.
Brendan, I just wanted to add, do you want to talk about what we did this past year with the high tides and beach closing and the rhizome rule?
Sure, yeah, Alex sent out a memo to the community leaders and permit holders, and we've updated our what was our Plover hotline to make it more of a inclusive driving hotline. So this was during the period of extreme tight points and areas that were subject to inundation of the tides after all of the no-named but serious winter storms we had. And so we were more active, or perhaps it was just more necessary in closing areas of the beach on MPS tracks that were impassable, as well as having some conversations with the municipalities about areas that we could collaborate on. And mostly it came down to communication, communicating that because certain areas of the beach were impassable, it's probably not advised to travel on certain days and at certain tides. And that's because we don't want people in the position where they have to make a decision about driving high or not driving at all. We'd rather they don't make the trip to begin with.
Thanks, Brendan. Okay, Jason. It's a question about the ferries. Since the ferry operator has indicated that these changes would result in off-season and shoulder season ferry service, wouldn't these changes make access more difficult for those without vehicle access? And shouldn't the policy objective be opposite, to facilitate non-vehicular access in the interest of preservation?
Yeah, so this change would be within the purview of the ferry operators to adjust, but we did note the comment and we'll consider the potential change as we review all the comments.
Okay, thank you. All right, Brendan, we're going to take this next one over to you. It doesn't seem the proposals B and C take into account where all of the additional vehicles go or where they're parked in the communities that impacts fire, safety, and emergency vehicle responses.
Yes, that's correct. Because we do not regulate parking in communities or what happens within the roadways of the communities. So if there are safety concerns, again, we're happy to coordinate on cross-jurisdictional issues. And we generally do not permit parking on federal tracks or in any sort of rights of way that would create emergency access issues for our vehicles or anybody that needs to get through there. So we do what we can within our jurisdiction, but areas within the communities are not within our jurisdiction.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm just going through some of these questions that are here now. There's question here. Brendan, I'll pass it over to you. It says that some of the statements about driving seem speculative, and they're asking about data that we have to support the assumptions.
Sure. So in the EA section, there is a first and foremost a references page where you can see all of the scientific reports or other reports that were used to inform the analysis, as well as the pretty detailed analysis. But we'll caveat that with the statements about increase in driving. Were actually more of an example. They were exercises to simulate what we think may happen, and this is caveated in the EA. They're not based on hard data just because we don't really have that data. We have gate records from some years, but the system has been spotty. And of course, there's access through, or was access through, the other side of the island, the East Gate, where there was not as robust a tracking system as far as fob swipes. And so driving has been happening on Fire Island for a long time, but only somewhat recently has there been technological systems in place to understand and track those vehicle patterns.
Okay, thank you. Eric, we'll go over to you then for this next question. Will Saltaire security be limited to 2 trips per day through the gate like everyone else? They make at least a dozen trips per day.
Sure, good question. So as I understand it, and part of that understanding is the affirmative head nods that I got from the Saltair leadership at the in-person meeting. As I believe it, that vehicle is not an authorized emergency vehicle as defined by state law. And very quickly, I'll read you the state law or the federal law, which is addressed not in the blue book, but it's earlier in the section under 36, which is very broad. It says an authorized emergency vehicle means a vehicle for official use for emergency purposes by a federal agency or an emergency vehicle as defined by state law. So when you look at the state law, the New York Vehicle and Traffic Law Section 101 defines very precisely what an emergency vehicle is. And it's every ambulance, police vehicle or bicycle, correction vehicle, a fire vehicle, civil defense emergency vehicle, ambulance, blood delivery vehicle, human organ delivery, county emergency medical, environmental emergency response, sanitation, patrol vehicle, hazardous material emergency vehicle, and then an ordnance, a bomb disposal vehicle for the armed forces. So by state law, I don't believe that one qualifies as an emergency vehicle. Therefore, it would be considered an official vehicle.
Okay, thanks, Eric. We got about 5 more minutes here of questions. I just wanted to remind folks in the event that we don't get to all of the questions, that we do ask that people still go ahead and submit them as comments in Pepsi. And also wanted to make sure that folks note that the park did update the frequently asked questions on the park's website in response to some of the comments and questions that we got during public scoping. So I believe our technical team does have the link to the FAQs. Just real quick before I forget, I thought I would queue that up and just see if you could drop that in case people have additional questions. But let's see. For this next question, I actually will go ahead and take it. They're asking if going forward, problems and issues arise, can the regulations be amended because the EA has been done recently? And absolutely. I think one of the key things to this whole proposal is if there are unexpected things that happen, the superintendent does maintain the authority and discretion to close driving down at any point. If changes are needed that are within the scope of the existing NEPA analysis, we would be able to rely on that for any additional changes that might need to be made. If it was outside of the scope, we would need to go through the process again and do a new NEPA analysis if those items that were proposed as changes are not included. But yeah, absolutely. If anything happens unexpected, the superintendent retains the ability to make those changes and to close things down. Okay. So I think I'm looking through my questions here. Brendan, I'm going to put this next question over to you. It's asking if there's concerns about increased freight traffic in the Bay and having possible impacts on the Bay ecology.
I'm assuming this is in reference to the construction business category being restricted to the shoulder seasons and not allowed to drive during the busy season. Oh, I'm sorry. I just realized my camera's not on. So of course there may be an impact from driving things over land or traveling across the bay on freight. But right now, water-based transportation is the first and foremost the primary means of access to Fire Island, and the driving is only supposed to supplement that access. So the reason that the construction materials are going to be restricted generally to freight during the summer is that is a period of both high visitor and high resource activity, nesting shorebirds, for example, and other sensitive species that are typically active in the summer season. And so what we're looking to do is reduce that conflict further. And in addition, those materials were always part of the construction category prior to Hurricane Sandy. And they were then deemed essential during a period when the construction materials needed to be removed. So, of course, there's an impact of moving anything across any resource, but we think that impact is minimal. And in this case, it is less of an impact on our park resources to go by water.
Great, thanks, Brendan. It looks like we have time here for one more question. Sonia, we'll put this one over to you.
Michelle, there's one more question in there that I would just like to answer, number 54, if you don't mind.
Okay. Don't you think when you ask community leaders they may be lying for their friends or within their own towns? Isn't that a concern for you guys?
We work with a variety of different community leaders, whether they're elected or not elected. We have stakeholders that we work with, including the Fire Island Association, the Year-Round Association, and also independent groups as well. So our hope is that when they are speaking on behalf of the greater community and the greater community concerns, or acknowledging what they know that they've vetted through their own deliberative process. So I just hope that's not the case. And if it does prove wrong, and there have been times, and I'll be honest, that someone was identified as a resident and we did not follow up with a federal permit, just because our vetting process proved otherwise. So it does give us opportunities to go against the towns or the villages based on our investigation and our vetting process. So I just wanted to make sure that we answered that question. Sonia, would you add anything to that?
No, I just was going to say that we wouldn't be relying solely on community leaders. You know, we want like a well-rounded vetting process. So we would get the supporting documentation, work with the towns, some of their groups that they have. You know, I reach out to people as well. So it's not just based solely on community leaders. We just want that to be clear, because we have heard comments about favoritism or good friends, and we don't want anyone to think that that's how we're going to work.
I agree. Thank you, Sonia. So with that, we're going to wrap up. I just wanted to thank you all for attending our virtual meeting tonight. As mentioned before, we'll be accepting comments through June 30th. Let's all turn on our cameras if you don't mind as we say our goodbyes. We are seeking comments that identify any topics or issues that are missing from the EA analysis or anything that may be incorrect. Your participation in the process has shaped the future of the permitting process at Fire Island National Seashore. I want to thank you again for your commitment, your passion, and being caring stewards for Fire Island National Seashore. We look forward to your comments and wrapping up this process in late fall, early winter. Once again, thank you and have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.